Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Real News Today. This is a special episode relating to adoption. It is a blessing to bring another life into the world and for someone to be thoughtful about raising someone else's offspring. This is a time of gratitude, of thanksgiving, and what a way to celebrate than to extend the gift of love to someone who is not biologically connected to you. Well, on this episode, we will have a discussion about what it looks like to really show unconditional love for someone who is not connected biologically to you. So I pray that this episode finds you with much gratitude and inspiration. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to have a discussion and hear your thoughts. But enjoy the episode coming up right now. One. Thank you guys so much for joining me for another episode of Real News Today. I am excited to have my next guest. I have Mikki Shepherd here, and we actually got connected through a mutual acquaintance, Altavis Pelzer. So I'm excited to have her here today. We're going to dive into some great topics about affirmations and law of attraction. So if you're curious about that, stay tuned. But before we get into some great conversation, I want to give Mikki the opportunity to introduce herself.
Okay, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I had a long time dream of writing a book originally about my dad. And then time went on, and then all of a sudden, as years went past, my husband and I wound up adopting our wonderful son, but we had not applied for adoption. So
Wow.
our background was real estate, business consulting, but my son was literally a real estate referral. And I like to tell people this one line because it helps them start to wonder what happened. But we had a baby in our hearts, in our arms, in our home before we ever applied for adoption.
That's
So never
awesome.
give up. Never give up.
That is awesome. Okay, so you've got me quite intrigued. I'm thinking, okay, real estate, baby, saying them in the same sentence. What happened?
Well, then my husband and I lived in Colorado. And we had been trying for years to have a baby, and nothing worked. I mean, we even took a trip to Hawaii, which was a lovely trip, but still no
Mhm.
baby. And I was very, very involved in realtor politics back then. And so we, because of that, I traveled a lot to different meetings. One year was actually February 1988. I was in San Antonio, Texas for meetings of the National Association of Realtors and Women's Council of Realtors, which I was very involved with. And a friend of mine had recently moved to San Antonio, and she said, you know what, we don't have any meetings this morning. Why don't you come with me and let's ride in the trolley car and let you see how San Antonio's grown since you used to be here. I was in the Air Force and I was stationed there. And I said, that'd be great. So we did. We went out on a trolley car ride. And when we got off the trolley car, she says to me, she said, have you and Paul ever thought about adopting? I said, what brought that on? And she said, Mikki, we've been on a trolley car for over an hour. Every baby we've passed, you're like olive oil. I mean, your head just goes
Mm.
right to the baby. So she said, so let me ask you again, if you could, would you adopt? I said, in a heartbeat, which is the name of the book.
Mm.
But it was a conversation. It was a great conversation. I love her to pieces. And but I really forgot about that conversation. I had been so committed for what would be the next 2 years that I really didn't think about it again. Fast forward, April 5th, 1990, I'm at yet another realtor meeting. And but we were back in Colorado at the time. And my husband called my hotel room and he said, why are you in your room? You're never in your room when you go to these meetings. I said, I don't know. My feet hurt. I didn't have a meeting. So I thought I'd come in and sit down for a bit. And I said, so if you don't think I'm here, why are you calling me? Keep in mind, it's 1990, no cell phones.
Mhm.
Um, um,
Mhm.
And he said, well, who's Carol Thompson? I said, oh, she's my women's council of realtors friend. She lives in San Antonio. And he said, well, we just had a very strange phone call. She has a friend who has a friend who decided this morning she wants to put her baby up for adoption. And she wants to know if we want him.
Wow.
It was like, oh my God, I didn't even know what to do. And I said, what'd you tell her? He said, I told her that I'd call you and you would call. I said, okay. So it's a long story, but because I was at a realtor event, the board of realtors I represented, the attorney was there, and he had told me about a year before that if we ever did consider adoption, to come see him first. So I went and found him. And I'm glad I did, because he had a friend who was the premier adoption attorney in Colorado. He's the attorney we wound up hiring is the attorney who proposed the Baby Jessica law back in the 90s. This was a time when adoption stories that people heard about were terrible.
Yeah.
They were frightening people. And the Baby Jessica one was, it was on national news every day. And, and so I really wanted to do something that was with the book that was going to show people there can be such good stories, and there really are. Anyway, so I don't want to take up all your time with this, but 19 days later,
wow,
I was in a delivery room in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in a hospital where not a lot of good things usually happened. It was a hospital where people on assistance, people on drugs, prisoners went to. But I got there as fast as I could. We had planned to bring Sharon, his birth mother, to Colorado, because Colorado had the best adoption laws. But she went into labor early. And excuse me, I was at another meeting too. I was in DC at the time, and she had called my husband and told him that her water broke. And you have to understand, my husband's background was property management. So he told her to call a plumber. And and she's going, no, you don't get it. And she's going, no, just get me on a plane. He said, I don't think so. He said, let me call Mikki. We'll figure it out. And he did. And he's telling me she wants to get on a plane. I said, she's going into labor. She's not getting on a plane. I said, let's get me on a plane. And we did. So, and I think I had the Pony Express to get there.
Wow.
So we had to stop and stop and stop. Anyway, just fast forward to the delivery room. We got in the delivery room. We're talking about baby, and we had already planned what his name was going to be, so there would be no change of name, because she was very strong about that. And so we're talking about CJ, and the doctor looked up at me and she said, what's CJ stand for? I said, Cameron Joel. And she said, how do you know it's a boy? I said, I don't know, Sharon, how do we know it's a boy? And she's saying, well, I had an ultrasound, and the doctor's shaking her head at me, because they weren't that true back then.
Right.
Remember, and you would remember, you have a 31-year-old. So, it was different. But we moved on. This hospital got so into this because they didn't usually have happy things happen. And excuse me. So sorry. Anyway, baby was born. Definitely a boy. And they wrapped him up and brought him over to us, and they're going, who do we give him to? And Michelle, I gotta tell you, that was the moment when excuse me, be strong.
Right.
If she's gonna change her mind, let it happen now. Right. So I said, give him to her. Okay, so they did. And she held him and she said, hi, CJ. Welcome to the world. I want you to meet your mom.
Oh.
And so there's a lot to it, but it worked out. What we didn't know was how much he was working his way toward us without us knowing about it, which is where the law of attraction comes in. But But I grew up in a home where my mom wound up having brothers and sisters because my grandmother remarried, and they were actually cousins who wound up being brothers
Mm,
and sisters. And then my dad came into my life when I was 12.
mm-hmm,
We never played the game of stepsisters and stepbrothers and stepfathers and all those words.
mm-hmm,
Family's family,
mm-hmm,
and it doesn't matter how you come together,
mm-hmm.
family. So that's what we wanted to instill for our family. And, here we are trying to share it with the world. I'm trying to, I keep thinking if we can get this message out, we might change one of the birth mothers' choice,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in fact, if you don't mind my saying so, I'm starting to host a podcast in January with Voice America
Awesome.
for that purpose. It's going to be called Adoption as a Choice.
Wow.
And I just think education is key.
Amen. That's amazing. Well, I am just really blown away by the story. I think this is just awesome. And, I think for people out there that are in a place where they want to have children and, that desire to have a baby can be so strong,
Yes.
and it can be so many other things that get wrapped into that, about, your worth and value and all this kind of stuff. So for somebody out there, how did you make the transition from being able to accept another child that wasn't biologically yours? I think that's one of the things that sometimes people don't even consider it being a choice because, we have this mentality that, if it's not your kid biologically, then, it's not really like you're a parent. You know what I mean?
No,
So
I
how
do know
did
what
you,
you mean. I do.
yeah.
I do.
So
Um,
how did you get to that point to realize, you know?
I don't know that we thought about it too much. We both wanted to be parents, my
Mhm.
husband and myself. And to me, growing up the way I grew up, it was natural to have people coming in and out of your lives who weren't biologically connected to you.
Mm,
Um, but I guess the best way I can answer that question is the night CJ was born. Um, I went back to the hotel to call my husband because I couldn't wait to tell him what I wanted to tell him since we had been married, that he was a dad.
mhm.
And okay, so I called him. He was outside in the rain planting a tree. I said, "Why?" He said, "I don't know. I just had this thing come to me today that if I had a baby, a son, I was going to plant a tree." No, he had never thought about doing this. Okay. Okay.
Wow.
The next day, we're finding out the laws. Like I told you earlier, Colorado has the best adoption laws. Minnesota has the worst.
Mm,
They do not recognize independent adoptions. So they
okay.
want all adoptions to go through their version of what would be social services. This is back then, maybe not now,
Mhm.
which was Lutheran services. We wanted to put the baby in
Mm,
a foster home. And Sharon, the baby's birth mother, said, "No, I want him to go home with his parents day one. That's the whole point of this." She thought
mhm.
the bonding time was incredible. And she wasn't a kid. I mean, she had a daughter and she
Mhm.
was 33. So, it was a well thought out decision, I guess. And
Mhm.
but so our attorney is trying to work all this out because obviously everything happened faster than it was supposed to. And so our attorney calls my husband. He said, "Okay, why don't you do your portion of the home study since we're doing everything backwards here for the adoption? And then you fly to Minneapolis, stay with the baby in a hotel, and Mikki can come back here and do her part." And he said, "You tell her that." And he said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "She's my wife. I've known her a long time. I never heard the voice I heard last night. She's not going to leave that baby."
Mhm.
And he was right because something did happen. And it wasn't something I thought about. It wasn't something you analyze. There was no doubt in my mind when that baby was born, he was mine. None. And I mean, and I know people say, okay, you had a birth mother who was, really into this. She had a lot of tough times, and nobody supported her in this decision. Nobody, nobody, her friends, her mother, and it was sad because she felt like she had had an abortion once before, and she planned to do it again, but she thought she miscarried, so she didn't go to the doctor. I'm grateful for that. And she said she took it as a sign that God was telling her she could do something good with her life. And this was it. And she was right.
That's
There's
awesome.
there's a child who's no longer a child, he's a grown man, but in New York, and he's my son. There's no doubt about it in my mind. There's no doubt about it in his mind. And it doesn't, it's all about love and just
Mhm.
be yourself. Don't get me wrong, there were moments. I mean, we had a moment watching Free Willy. You must have know that movie.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're watching it for like the 100th time, which I think you can probably understand.
Exactly.
We're there one night and we're watching it. It was his favorite movie, and all of a sudden he turns to me and he's going, "Do you remember, Mama? Remember?" I'm going, "Remember what?" He said, "When I was in your belly."
Mm.
My husband can be a coward sometimes. He
Mhm.
started backing out of the room because he didn't, oh my God, what's she gonna do? And I don't know where the words came from, but I just looked at him and I said, "No, honey, remember, you were never in my belly. You were always smart." He said, "Oh, that's right." And we continued watching the movie, which is when
Mhm.
I learned that when children ask you questions and you think these are big questions, they're not.
Mhm.
They weren't little answers, and it made sense, and it just reinforced. He always knew, it was never a secret. He's very proud of it, and I guess the best way I can tell you, I had a friend who also adopted before we did, and we all
Mhm.
moved from Colorado to Arizona around the same time. When their son got to be early teens, he got in a lot of trouble.
Mhm.
And I was talking to her. I mean, I had known her since I was in the Air Force, so we had known each other for many, many years. I said, "You're a nurse. You are you talking to him about this?" She said, "There's nothing we can do." I said, I don't understand." She said, "No, it's in his DNA." I said, "This is coming from my friend, the nurse." And I said, "You know what? You adopted him at birth." And I said, "I don't believe that." I said, "It's what you learn, what you live. It's your people that are the people that are shaping your lives." And no,
Mhm.
you're not going to tell me that somebody has these terrible traits in them because they have certain DNA when they've been with you since the minute they were born. That's not
Mm.
right. That's not how you shape people. And I would imagine, Michelle, with the children you have, you probably have had their friends who wind up seeming like family along the way.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, I had a brother that we got that way. His name was Chet Holmes. He passed away 9 years ago,
I'm sorry to
but
hear that.
he was a best-selling author. But he came into my I wasn't even here. I had already moved away, and I had come back, and all of a sudden there's this 12-year-old in my house that I don't know.
Mhm.
So I'm going to my mother. Who's that? And she says, "Oh, that's your new brother." I said, "How'd you do that? How did I leave 3 months ago and come back and you have another 12-year-old?" Well, he was a friend of my brother's. He was the new kid in
Mhm.
school. They got to know each other. They became friends. They were heading home one day from school, decided to stop by his house first on the way to our house. And when he got there, his parents had moved.
What?
Yep, without telling him.
Wow.
And from that day on, he became part of our family. And there was no formal adoption done, nothing like that. I mean, even in his book, it's dedicated to my three beautiful sisters, um,
Wow.
and my mom and my brother. And because and that's what he learned, and he was 12. So kind of going back to my story, you can't believe that somebody was that way because of who gave birth to them. If you
Mhm.
can see that a 12-year-old came into our lives in a pretty awkward situation, to say the
Mhm.
least. And he knew
Mhm.
he was loved. He was he he's just as much my brother as my brother.
Wow.
Um, and it took a while for us to get there. I'll give you that. But
Mhm.
but nevertheless, it was there. And so that's my whole thing. I really believe that families come about because of what we do. And I think it could be a combination of biology and not biology. And it's
Mhm.
kind of like a husband and wife. I mean, you have nothing biologically in common,
Mhm.
but you love each other, but you're gonna go through bad times and good times. What keeps you together?
Yeah.
To fight to
So
the
true.
end, you know?
Mhm.
So it, it's just it's an exciting thing. I mean, I think people need to be educated on it more. I don't want
Mhm.
anybody forced. I'm not into forcing either way. What I am
Mhm.
is into enlightening. Just
Mhm.
a little education, because what I do know in my heart, and I've read so many statistics about it. I mean, we have 2,363 abortions every day in this country.
Wow.
And it's so sad because
Mhm.
I realize things aren't always right for somebody, but give someone else a chance to love that child. Because
Right.
10 years from now, either way, that person's going to remember. And they're
Mhm.
going to remember a horrible day in their lives, or when they gave the greatest gifts they could ever give.
Yeah.
I think it makes your heart stronger to be able to give the gift of life, rather
Mhm.
than I think it hurts people. I mean, there's so many statistics on uh on women years later. It just haunts them.
Mhm.
And I really do believe, I think I just don't think they get the full story on both options.
Mhm. Mhm. That's just amazing. And I think the whole way that this came about, um, it was just kind of smooth in the flow. So for
Mhm.
somebody who has been pursuing adoption, or they've made up their mind where they're open to it.
Mhm.
You mentioned a lot about some of the stories about it, and a lot of the legalities and things that we may not be aware of. You can make up your mind that you want to do it, but
Right.
how everything just flowed for you. What advice would you give to a couple who is thinking about this?
I would say don't give up, and don't be nervous about it. I think the most nerve-wracking part, and it depends on what state you're in, but in our case, there was a 14-day period
Mm-hmm.
before the birth mother's rights were terminated. And that's the period of time when, if somebody's going to change their mind, that's when they need to do it. Um, that was scary. It was very scary.
Mm-hmm.
We had an
Mm-hmm.
escape plan. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we were so strongly bonded. It was amazing. And but one of the things that I think people need to tell everybody they know when they're trying to adopt, because you never know where that person's going to come from. And if
Mm-hmm.
it's not, if you don't necessarily um, want to have a newborn, or at least are open to the choices, there's an incredible foster adopt program in this country, and
Mm-hmm.
those children are looking for somebody to love. But I know cost becomes a thing with this,
Mm-hmm.
and I know in our case, it was real estate market at that time was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did payments. We actually did a baby promissory note, where
Mm.
our plan was, my husband came up with this idea. He had put partnerships together with investors, and he had just read the Crystal Cathedral story.
Mm-hmm.
And Robert Schuller had said, well, I could have asked one person for 1 million, or 10 people for 100,000. And my husband came up with this idea, and he said, what if we ask 1,000 people for $5? That would at least get it going. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
going, okay. So we did. We put this note together that said, we explained what was happening, because it was a very short period of time, even if he had come on time. And
Mm-hmm.
So our plan was of $5 that we would pay you back with interest in the form of a picture within a year. We never
Mm.
got to send all of them out, but the ones we did send, every single one came back marked paid.
Mm.
Because it touched people's hearts. That's why I'm saying tell the people around you that you
Mhm.
want to adopt, because you don't know who you might see tomorrow. Somebody might. We had friends come out of the woodwork that we'd known forever, but we never knew there was an adoption in their life
Mhm.
until we were going through this. And so we were
Mhm.
hearing story after story after story, which is one of the goals I have, is to get a lot of those people's stories together and share them, not only on the upcoming podcast, but in the book. Because the
Mhm.
more people can see different stories, I think it helps
Mhm.
them. But money wise, there's something out there that didn't exist when we adopted. That was tax benefits,
Mhm.
and they're big. Um,
Mhm.
hopefully they'll still be there, but they are as of right now. And everybody does payment things and stuff like that. But you can't. I think you have to embrace it like you embrace anything that you really want so badly that you love before you've even seen him or her.
Mhm.
So and the more you share with people, you're gonna have people that don't get it.
Mhm.
Believe me. My mother-in-law did not understand this. All she kept saying was, "What kind of a woman gives up her child?" And we're
Mhm.
going, the kind of woman who wants him a life
Yeah.
can't give him. She knew she couldn't. It would it was not a good situation he would have been going home to. And she had a daughter that had MS. I mean, her plate was full
Mhm.
and very disturbing. I mean, she was living with a guy who was not the nicest person in the world.
Mhm.
And so she was able to do two things. I mean, she was able to feel good about a decision she made. She knew she had just given life
Mhm.
and a family. She got a family started, even though she
Mhm.
wasn't there. That I think that's what we have to see. We just have to hear from more people. I don't even know if it's still out there, but when we first found out what was happening, we did what we usually do. We always try to research things. There were
Mhm.
not a lot of books on adoption back then, but there
Right.
was one, and it was called Dear Birth Mother. And we bought it for Sharon and sent it to her. And when I got to the hospital that night and went into the room, she was sitting there reading it.
Wow.
And she said, "This is so great." I said, "I thought it might help instead of just hearing me all the time saying thank you, that you might want to know what other people were feeling." And because it was very good. It was just a bunch of letters to birth mothers from adoptive mothers.
Mm.
So we want to grow people. We need more
Mhm.
children. You've
Yeah.
done your share. There's no
Yeah,
doubt.
I've done. Hey, that cup has passed from me, so I'm glad to be done with that. But I'm just loving the story because of the intention behind it. I mean, even getting that book and giving it to her, and just the knowledge that you have about her story.
Mhm.
Like when you found out that she was that she was going to give you your son.
Mhm.
What was that conversation like? I mean, of course your friend connected
Mhm.
you guys, but how did you have that relationship, and how long of a time span was that before the baby was born?
19 days. We had
Wow.
yeah, on April 5th when I did call back after I talked to the attorney, and I asked for the friend of my friend, because that's
Mhm.
who had called. And the woman that answered the phone said she just went down to the laundry. She'll be right back. Can you wait? And I said, yeah. I told her who I was, but she didn't tell
Mhm.
me who she was.
Mhm.
So I waited on the phone, and finally Wendy, that was her name, came on the phone, and she said, um, I, I said, "How did you find out about us?" And she said, "Carol said that if I ever knew anybody in this situation, that she knew two people that would make the best parents in the world." And
Mm.
And she said, she gave me all your information. I've had it ever since. And I said, okay. And she said, well, I said, well, I'm not sure what I should do. Do you think I should call her, or, how do I approach her? And she said, well, you were just talking to her. And I
Wow.
was. And she said, yeah. And I said, okay. So she got on the phone. We talked to her a little bit, and she told me what happened. She said she told me that she had planned to have an abortion and started bleeding, believed she lost the baby. The man she was living with was not the father.
Mm-hmm.
And he's pretty abusive. I actually did get to meet him because at the hospital when I got there. And she said, so she decided she wanted to do this. And then her friend told her about us. And she said, so that morning, she had gone to Lutheran Services, which is who handles social services type things in Minnesota back
Mm-hmm.
then. And they told her, great, we'll take the baby the day after he's born and we'll put him in a foster home for 6 weeks. And she said, no, I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to start his life out with his parents. I don't want him going someplace else for 6 weeks. And the woman's telling her, well, that's what we do. And she said, fine, I'll just keep the baby. And that's when she went home, told her friend who called us. So I said, okay. I said, don't worry about anything. But I said, I've contacted an attorney. We're finding out it's all new to all of us. We'll figure this all out. And I said, I told her, I said, I'm not home. I'm in Denver and I'll be home tomorrow. Can I call you back then? And she said, yes. I said, okay. So let's talk tomorrow. Let's find out more about what's happening. And we're just going to stay in touch. The baby was supposed to be born May 10th. And we met with the attorney that Monday. And he said, just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep calling her every day, and answer questions, ask questions, but just keep her engaged so she feels how much you feel about this. I said, okay. And he said, we'll work it out. And well, we found out. That's when we found out that if we could fly her to Colorado, and have her, we had many friends who offered to have her stay with them if she
Okay.
came. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that she could, because in Colorado at the time you could establish residency like in 24 hours.
Mm.
And so that way she'd be there. She was totally on board with this. This is what she
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do. And
Mm-hmm.
nobody could say you had to go into a foster home or anything like that. But like I said, labor came early and we had to deal with Minnesota. The night after the baby was born, the Lutheran service people did come to see her and told her we're going to put the baby in a foster home for 6 weeks. And she said, I already told you, I'm just going to keep the baby. And they left. And she called me and she said, are you fixing this? We're working on it. Okay. So later that day, we found something out. My attorney called me. There's a lot of goofy stories here, but I promise you every single one of them is true.
Mm-hmm.
Called and he said, because we knew the Minnesota laws were conflicting with Colorado laws. And so he called and he said, I'm going to tell you a story. Don't talk, just listen. I said, okay. He said, you understand you're my client. Yes. And he said, okay, if you called me tomorrow, said that you robbed a liquor store, as an officer of the court, I would have to turn you in. So, okay. He said, but if you called me tomorrow and said that I'm going to rob a liquor store, he'd have to turn me in. If I called him tomorrow and said I robbed a liquor store, you're my client, that's privileged information.
Mm.
Okay. He said, okay. Also, we found another little known law in Minnesota because they were saying we couldn't take the baby out of the state. And he said the law says that any parent in Minnesota can allow anybody they choose to babysit their child for up to 30 days. It doesn't say where. It was like one of these old antiquated laws in the books. So that's what we did. We robbed a liquor store and And
I love
and
it.
and I called my husband. I said, "Okay, can you call your sister because she was our airline connection, if you will."
Mhm.
I said, "And see if she can get me a flight out tomorrow." And so then he called me back and he said, "Okay, I know you don't lie." He said, "But if anybody asks you how old the baby is, you have to say 9 days." I said, "Why? Am I going to hurt him?" And he said, "No, it's just that's what they asked for." I said, "Okay." So, but here, I'll tell you this might, it'll warm your heart. It warms mine every time I say it. I went there the next day to take her home. I went to get some clothes for the baby and blanket and all that stuff. And,
Mhm.
and when I got there, the Lutheran services had shown up again before I got there.
Mhm.
And she told me again, I'm just going to keep the baby. So the doctor showed up and they brought us two sets of footprints
Oh.
and took pictures of each of us so we could have each other. So like I have it for my son.
Oh.
And they just because the part I didn't tell you, 22 babies were born that night. Only two
Wow.
were healthy, and
Wow.
one of them is my son. The rest were um, either hooked on heroin or other drugs or had other problems because as I told you earlier, this was a hospital that took care of a lot of different things, and
Wow.
it was so sad. But the doctor had really gotten into this whole thing, and she had been very, very supportive of our birth mother throughout. And so we went back to the hotel. She wrote a letter saying she gave us permission to take care of CJ in Colorado. And then I called down to the desk and I said, I need a cab. You need to stop to drop somebody off, and then I need to get to the airport. And the guy says, there are no cabs available today. Now, keep in mind, I'd been staying there for 3 days, so they knew the whole
Mhm.
story that was happening. And I said,
Mhm.
what are you talking about? And he says, no cabs available, but we did manage to get you a limousine. I said, okay,
Wow.
I was at a convention for 7 days before I came here. I don't have money for a limousine. And he said,
Mhm.
your money's no good here. Whenever you're ready, come on down. They arranged it, the hotel. They wanted to
Wow.
be part of this. They saw it as a miracle. And it was just one. This is what gets me excited is that so many people who had absolutely nothing to do with this
Mhm.
became part of it
Wow.
and wanted to. And we dropped her off. I think it's the only time in her life she had ever been in a limousine, and I'm crying the whole time. And when she got out, I said, I don't know how to say thank you anymore. I mean, how do you say thank you, woman who just gave you your dream child? I taught,
Mhm.
and boy or girl, it wouldn't have mattered to me. It was so real. And she said, you need to stop crying before you get to the airport, or they're going to think you're doing something wrong. And
Mhm.
trying to get me to laugh. So we agreed we would talk each day for the next couple of weeks. Um, but when she got out of the car, the limo driver said to me, he said, "Is she the birth mother?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, she's right. It's 10 minutes to the airport. You gotta stop crying." I said, "I know. How do you thank somebody who just did this for you?"
Mhm.
Um, but we made a deal. My husband sent her a letter with a gold, it was kind of a paperweight, but it was heart shaped gold thing.
Mhm.
Um, just because they never got to meet, and we did talk, and
Mhm.
then we all agreed that um, there wasn't going to be contact
Mhm.
between her and our son, but I would send her a letter once a year
Mhm.
and with pictures, and that when he turned 18, I would, if he was interested, if he wanted to meet her, we would make it happen.
Mhm.
And that's what we did. When he turned 18, he had no desire,
Mhm.
but at least he knew he could, and he always knew he could.
Mhm. Mhm.
So but it was helpful. Now there are people, just saying some more of you other things somebody might be thinking about. There are independent adoptions where the birth mother and the adoptive mother or parents do stay in touch more in person
Mhm.
than we did. But I
Mhm.
think that's unusual, but it's, you can plan it however you both all decide to do it. Uh,
Mhm.
and I think nobody knows what's right. I don't think it can only be this way or that way.
Mhm.
I think the parties involved have to decide what's going to
Yeah.
be best, you know. Um,
Absolutely. I mean, this is just really just it's just a blessing. And I think it's really such a beautiful story around the holidays and so
mhm.
appropriate for the time as we approach, Thanksgiving, having gratitude,
Yes.
realizing as parents the part that we play in raising, a life. I think anybody can have a child, but
Mhm.
it is really the brass knuckles about actually going through the process of, forming this young person into being um, a contributor into this world.
Mhm.
So I think the last question I would ask is, we had talked before we started recording
Mhm.
about affirmations. So
Yes.
talk to us about, your stance on that and what you would like to share with other parents
Oh,
about.
absolutely. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, what I was talking about before we recorded was that I'm big on affirmations. I was believe that what, and I didn't make this up. This came from a lot of other people, but what you think about, you speak about, or based the other way, what you speak about, you think about.
Mhm.
And when you think about something, you're speaking about something, you're bringing it about.
Mhm.
And so Zig Ziglar used to talk about people who got up on the wrong side of the bed and blah blah blah, and and they barked at everybody all day long. Came home and kicked the cat, and he said, "Wouldn't it have been better if they just kicked the cat to begin with? They could have gotten all that out." Not that he wanted people to kick cats, but
Mhm.
we both really, my husband and I really thought that was something we could share, and we did. We have a list of 13 affirmations that we taught our son, and like this, like everyone who comes to me leaves better and happier. They're just short little things,
Mhm.
and he learned them all, but each one has a reason. That one is about kindness and compassion and friendship. um Winners always say please or thank you, which has to do with manners, respect for others. So they're
Mhm.
very simple things, but they're positive. And
Mhm.
as he grew older, it kind of became a game that he'd ask for something, and my husband would jump in and say, "Okay, well, give me an affirmation," and he'd roll his eyes, but he could do it and still can. And and I do believe it. If we can help our children, especially right now,
Mhm.
we have a lot of children very confused over the last year, who are having, they need to transition back to children and
Mhm.
with children in school. And
Mhm.
but they've been through, we all have, but they've children, I think, more. It's a tough year. All of a sudden,
Mhm.
you're
Mhm.
not around people, and I think the affirmations, which are in the book, so if anybody did get the book, they'd have them. Um, it helps them have something that you can work with them on, and just teach them one at a time, and then have them repeat them. But it's in their head. Once you get it in their head, it's there, and it's in yours. So it works both ways. But I do think they help. They just I like I told you the show before we started that we feel so strongly about it. We had it in our will,
Mhm.
when my son was very young, just in case. We really wanted people to, whoever, if somebody else wound up taking care of him, who we had designated, we just want to make sure it continued,
Mhm.
because we're around negativity all the time.
Mhm.
And I'm not Pollyanna. I mean, everything's just not rosy, but you can't get to rosy if you don't try.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so, there's got to be a way that we each every day have something, whether it's prayer. meditation, combination of affirmations, something, but something that you're feeding your mind. And so that's I really think that can help children right now. I think it can help their parents right now. We've been through a tough time, the country, and but we're people, and people need something positive.
So true. So true. Well, I just absolutely love this story. And what is the best way for the audience to get a copy of your book and reach out to you?
It's called In a Heartbeat, The Miracle of a Family That Was Meant to Be. They can go, it's everywhere, Amazon, Barnes Noble, but they can go to my website, which is Mikki, Mikki, Shepherd, Shepard, author.com. And if you go in there and you want to reach out to me, there is a place to do that. And I will respond always.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mikki. I'm so glad that we were connected. I am just loving the story, and it's such an inspiration. These are the kind of stories that, we can't get enough of. And anything that I could do to help, with your mission, I am elated to be a part of it, because I think, just as a mom, there's even just the support that's necessary, from my kids being involved in sports, and, the community that comes about from that type of support, as well as school and things like that. It's definitely so many people that can help mold a child that don't have anything to do with being biologically connected. So I totally agree with so many things that you have mentioned, because I think it's so important to realize that love and community transcends any biological connection.
No, I agree. Thank you. And we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we want to thank you guys so much for joining us today. Please share this recording with someone. This is a season of gratitude. November is Gratitude Month. And it is also a time to recognize children being adopted for this month. And so it was such an appropriate story. And just, you never know how you can impact a life, to just recognize that a lot of people, we're concerned about the weather, the economy, but one decision can determine if someone actually is being able to be blessed with the breath of life. And I just love this story, to be able to educate people to realize that, there is some value that we need to place on life above some of these other trivial things that we get concerned about. And I know, just as a mother myself with a number of children, finances can always be an issue, or any other thing that we could come up with parenting. But when your child is in front of you, you just find a way to make it work out. A lot of those things just turn into such small obstacles when you see someone living and breathing in front of you. So again, just thank you so much, Mikki. So
thank you,
glad
Michelle.
that you were able to share. And we want to thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you on the next episode. Bye for now, everybody.